Greetings metalheads and welcome to No Nonsense Metal Reviews. I'm George and today I'm actually back with an album ranking. Haven't done one of these in a little while, not since the Nightwish ranking that I did a little while ago. But today I'm going to be doing an album ranking, quite a short catalogue to be honest, with a notable omission, but I'll get onto that in a moment. A band that have been a favourite of mine for many, many years, ever since I was an early teen when I discovered this band. A band that I absolutely love. Bands that have been massively influential to the first and second wave black metal scenes, to thrash metal, to just extreme metal in general. These guys have been a massively influential force in heavy music. And it's a band that hold a very dear spot in many, many metalheads' hearts. Sadly, a now defunct band following death of a key member a number of years ago. However, this band, I am of course talking about Switzerland's finest, Celtic Frost, an absolute legend, a true legend as well. That name, that term I should say, gets bandied around a lot in heavy music or just the world in general in society. But Celtic Frost are a genuinely legendary band fronted by one of the all-time metal legends, the great Tom G. Warrior, Thomas Gabriel Fisher, notable of course for Celtic Frost, but also for the band prior to Celtic Frost, the great underground masters, pioneers in fact, Hellhammer, and more recently, Triumph of Death, a kind of revised version, different lineup, but playing that classic Hellhammer material in a live setting. We had Triumph of Death, and also one of my all-time favourite bands, a band that I absolutely love and have been devoted to ever since I discovered them again as a teenager, the mighty Triptykon. So we've got a lot of love for this band, really. If you can't tell, I'm a huge fan of Celtic Frost, massive fan, even probably a bigger fan of Triptykon, in fact. But all round, I love Tom G. Warrior's music. I think he's an all-round great personality as well. So, I mentioned there's a notable exception. I do not have a copy of the 1988 album, I believe it was, entitled Cold Lakes. The reason that I haven't bothered to check that out is because I haven't really heard many good things about it. And I know that there's probably fans out there, don't get me wrong, who will say, Cold Lakes is the best thing Celtic Frost ever did. I absolutely love that album. But because of the amount of negative press and the very fact that Tom G. Warrior has basically disowned it, it doesn't even consider it to be a Celtic Frost album. I think he sort of considers it to be a bit of a blip in time. And also the fact that it has not been reissued, has not been made accessible over the years. It has never led me to actually want to check it out or go any further with that. So for the purposes of this album ranking, I'm just going to be talking about the main 5 albums. 5 albums? Yes, 5 albums in the Celtic Frost catalogue. The ones that we all know and to varying degrees will love. So we will kick off then. I just will highlight, before I kick off, I just showed this Innocent and Wrath compilation. This is a rather nice double disc compilation from Noise Records, BMG. This came out a few years ago, 2017, so quite a number of years actually, 6 years ago, and I've had this in my car for the majority of that time. I think I bought it in HMV for about £6 or something, however many years ago, and because I have basically just been playing this over and over again, not exclusively, but I've played it a lot over the years, I know a lot of this material very, very well. Some material better than others, and interestingly enough, when I've been listening to these albums and these releases again and these tracks again over the last sort of month or so in preparation of doing this album ranking, my opinions on some things have changed in quite an unexpected manner. What I thought was going to be outright my favourite album actually ended up kind of going down a little bit in expectations, not expectations, but surpassed by some of the other albums, shall we say, just to be fair, because as I say, this is a legendary band. They inspire a lot of love and a lot of attention. Anywho, I would say that Innocence and Wrath, if you're looking to get a bit of an overview of Celtic Frost, maybe you're not a fan already, maybe you just haven't gotten around to checking them out. You know, there's a lot of music in the world. There's a lot of great releases out there. Maybe you haven't got around to checking out Celtic Frost yet. I'd say pick yourself a copy of this up. It covers pretty much all the best material from all the main releases, shall we say, up to, or the first 4 albums anyway. First 4? No. The BMG albums, the Noise Records ones. Check it out. It's definitely worth it if you can pick up a cheap copy. So, we'll kick off then with album number 5. Now, this album, I must admit, I've really tried over the years to get into this album. I almost want to really love it and appreciate it. Certainly when I've read interviews and reviews with bands such as Paradise Lost, who I'm a big fan of Paradise Lost, really gotten into them over the years, where these bands have cited this album as being a massive influence and a hugely important album that meant the absolute world to them. So this album, this is the 3rd studio album. This is Into the Pandemonium, released in 1987, I believe. This album, I just don't quite get it. There's some fundamental issues there. I mean, the cover's great. The cover's really good. It's eye-catching. Really not sure about this lineup on the back here. I don't really know what's going on with these guys aesthetically. Tom G. Warrior doesn't look like Tom G. Warrior anymore by this point. He looks like he really needs a good sleep, and I think he's having a bit of an identity crisis, perhaps. But what I will say about this album is that you've got a good lineup here. You've got Martin Eric Ain, of course, in the band, and you've also got Reed St. Mark on drums, who's a very good drummer. I've tried with this, but there's some fundamental issues. So fundamental issues. We'll start with the negative on this. The album kicks off with a cover of whoever's song, Mexican Radio. Now, it's just terrible. I don't want to hear that. I certainly don't want to hear that kicking off a Celtic Frost album. Not when you look at the majesty of the albums that came before this. No way do I want to hear that. It's just ruins it. Starting off with the cover, no, terrible. It should be a bonus track at most. Really just cannot get on board with that. Then the first track proper, Mesmerised. I can only describe Tom G. Warrior's vocals as being horrifically whiny and just totally annoying. And I absolutely love this guy. I worship him. He is a fantastic vocalist. He is a all-round great personality. But his vocals on Mesmerised annoy me significantly. You can tell this isn't an album that I have a huge amount of love for. Things do improve in terms of the 3rd track, Inner Sanctum. Now, Inner Sanctum is more leaning towards the album, you know, this quality of material from the album prior to this, to Megatherion. But it's still not up that level. It's better. It's one of the standout tracks. Alongside, I think Babylon Fell is another good one, as is Caress into Oblivion. That's a good kind of, I think there's 2 parts, if you like, to that. But they're good. They're good songs, but still not of that quality. Although those 3 tracks, Inner Sanctum, Babylon Fell, and Caress into Oblivion, they're definitely album highlights. The 4th track there, which I'm not going to try and pronounce, is a really annoying kind of interlude piece that totally loses my interest. One in Their Pride, can't deal with. I Won't Dance, The Elders Orient, again, totally lost on me, doesn't do it for me. Rex Irae, Requiem, the instrumental piece that's been revived over the years in Triptychon, certainly in their Live with the Metropole Orchestra release. Requiem, the big release that they did a few years ago. That's an interesting piece, but really this album just doesn't quite have the material for me. It just doesn't. It just falls flat, and I've really tried with it, like I say. Some of the bonus materials are okay. Sorrows of the Moon, in the Chapel in the Moonlight, I think. But it just really, overall, not a great album. not a great album at all. That's why it's at number 5 for me. There's going to be a lot of people out there that will absolutely love it and understand the artistic approach, because it's a very artistic, very creative album. There's a lot of experimental stuff going on there. It's very different. There's a lot of boundary pushing, but it just doesn't work for me. Maybe it's just me and my interpretation. Absolute respect to you if you do love that album, but for me, that's a no. So that's why it's at number 5, Into the Pandemonium. Up next, after the debacle with Cold Lakes, we then had this album in 1990. This is Vanity Nemesis. This is probably the most thrash metal album Celtic Frost have ever released. It's a bit of a return to form. I think it definitely deserves praise and credit for being a bit of a return to form here. What we have got is some pretty killer riffs. I have to admit though, overall I'm still not a fan of Tom's vocals on this album. They sound very thin and squealy, and it's just doesn't quite do it for me. However, it's a marked improvement from his vocals from Into Pandemonium. But it's still not quite there yet, if you know what I mean. That kind of rough approach, that that snarling, filled vocal style. No, not quite there yet. But we do get some pretty cracking thrashers here. The Heart Beneath have a fair bit of groove. This album, weirdly enough, it has a bit of a Megadeth kind of feel to it in a way. A little bit of a Metallica sprinkling. Bit of a Megadeth sprinkling in there. Some of the tracks are really good. I mentioned The Heart Beneath, Wine in My Hand, Third from the Sun, has impeccable groove. There's a real stomper. Wings of Solitude, a big rocker. It's got a bit of there's a few tracks here, such as This Island Earth, or it might be The Restless Seas. I think both of them actually almost have a bit of a Nwabum kind of heavy metal vibe to them as well. So it's interesting stuff. It's creative. It's experimental again, but it's much more metal. It's much more definitively metal. As I say, it's quite thrashing throughout. We've got the Great Phallic Tantrum, which is a bit of an album highlight, to be honest. Bit of a belter. And then we've got the 1-2 title tracks, track 9 and 10 respectively. Vanity and then Nemesis. Good tracks, actually. Really, really good tracks. Some seriously crunchy riffs going on there. We've also got some sort of really quite chilling vocal work. There's a lot of female vocal contribution throughout this album, which is good, just sort of scattered around. Not bad tracks. Not bad tracks at all. A good thrash metal, speed metal, heavy metal sort of album. Still not quite at that top level of the other albums out there that Celtic Frost have produced. More on that in a moment, but still not a bad effort. I think this one is massively overlooked though. I think a lot of people would just kind of give up after Into the Pandemonium, which is a bit of a shame because this is miles better than that album in my opinion. So number 4, Vanity Nemesis, a bit of a return to form, but still not quite there. So to number 3 then. Now this was the big surprise for me because I am a massive Triptykon fan. So much so I have their logo on my arm there. Love Triptykon. Absolutely mean the world to me. Their albums, those 2 albums and the EP, absolutely love them. And the most similar material that we get from Celtic Frost, which I know Tom G. Warrior considers this period of Celtic Frost almost to be a continuation or the ignition point for what became Triptykon later on, almost like they're linked. See, 2 separate bands, but linked through his artistic creativity and his music. And I am, of course, talking about the Great Monotheist. Now, this album is an absolute monster, released in 2006. This is a phenomenal album. This sees Celtic Frost adopt a really quite dirgy, sludgy, death doom kind of approach here. More doom and more sludge than it is death metal, definitely. But this is a really good incarnation of Triptykon, the Triptykon of Celtic Frost, rather, that is very much parallel to Triptykon and what we get. You listen to Monotheist, and then you listen to the first Triptykon album in particular, although, Milana Kosmata still has that continuation, there's a lot of similarities there. A lot of similarities, certainly in Tom's vocal style, which is great. I think that Tom's vocals on this album, the best that it's been for a lot of years, over 2 decades perhaps. Seriously good vocals, but the dirgy, sludgy riffs are just delicious. We kick off with Progeny, which seamlessly leads into Ground. Now these are so full of grooves, it's unbelievable. The weight of those reverbing, dirgy riffs, I just cannot describe in words. They are the sort of riffs that you just cannot help but groove along to. Stop what you're doing, you head bang, you just get into that trance, that riff-induced trance. Progeny, Ground, into the absolutely chilling, spine-tingling, hauntingly beautiful and atmospheric A Dying God Coming into Human Flesh. Wow. I know I've talked about this album before on the channel, and I've cited that particular track as being a bit of a masterpiece, but the more you listen to it, the more absolutely mesmerising it is. It's so freaking good. Then we've got some more absolute belters. Drowned in Ashes is a bit of a weird one. It's a bit of a kind of odd experimental piece, a little bit kind of trippy. We've got some interesting female vocals on there. We've got Os Abysmi del Veldath. I'm not quite sure on the pronunciation of that, but a heavy hitter with some massive droning riffs, very drony stuff. Then we've got the chilling and beautiful Obscured, which is a real doom piece, very much akin to some of the tracks that we get in from Triptykon over the years. Domain of Decay, Aeon Elohim, massive stuff, freaking great, absolutely brilliant, massive riffs, seriously good atmosphere, really good songwriting. I mean, this is just miles ahead from an album like Vanity Nemesis or Into the Pandemonium. Talk about creativity and experimental. This is freaking monstrous. Up next, we've got Triptych in 3 parts. So we've got Totengott, another interesting kind of, I'm going to say like an instrumental piece, but with some really weird vocals in the background there, really chilling stuff. Then we've got Synagoga Satanae, which is a 14-minute long, droning, doomy, dark, dismal, deep epic, very much akin to The Prolonging, the closing track, the 20-minute or 19-minute long closing track from the first Triptykon album. Then we've got the closing epic Winter, Requiem, Chapter 3 finale. Very beautiful orchestral piece there. Very good stuff indeed. But for a long time, this was absolutely my favourite Celtic Frost album by a mile, simply because it was so similar to the Triptykon releases. But over the years, as I've been really listening to the other 2 releases from this band a lot more, it's still up there. I mean, my top 3 are interchangeable, but I think I've fallen deeply in love with those first 2 albums, which we'll talk about more in a moment, over the years. And this one, maybe it's just because I've listened to it so much, and these other 2 kind of seem a little bit different and more. They've got a different edge. But either way, an absolute stormer of an album. I can absolutely understand if anyone said this was their favourite, then 100% I can understand where you're coming from, because that is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful album. A true work of art. Absolute stunner. So number 3, Monotheist. So we're down to the crunch here, because we are at number 2. As I say, my number 1, 2 and 3, the top 3 are pretty much interchangeable. However, I think these 2, 1 and 2, they're definitely leading the way by a little bit of a margin at the minute. And this was a really tough one, because I've listened to these 2 albums pretty much back to back over the last couple of weeks. I've listened to them so much, trying to make that difficult decision. So much listening going on, in fact, that I realised I left the CD of this in the car. But luckily I have my trusty tape. Da-da! I am talking about 2 Megatherion, number 2, my second favourite Celtic Frost album, 2 Megatherion, an absolute delight. Released in 1985 with that iconic H.R. Geiger artwork. This album is absolutely glorious. Absolutely glorious stuff. Featuring Tom G. Warrior on vocals, guitars, Reed St. Mark on drums, and Dominic Steiner on bass and effects. This album is an absolute masterpiece. Notably heavier than the debut album, but so freaking good. Faster paced, you've got more of that kind of second wave black metal kind of edge. You've got more definable black metal material here there, but what I'm talking about is in terms of the kind of the pace of the riffs, the speed of the riffs, the level of distortion there, the vocal style. It's packed full of absolute bruises. Start to finish, this is all killer stuff. We start off with a very iconic, massive, ominous instrumental piece in the form of Innocence and Wrath. Then we are launched into the Usurper, a riff machine of biblical proportion. An absolute delight. Dual Throne and thrashing machine. We've got the very doomy, dark, dismal Dawn of Megiddo. The Great Eternal Summer. The legendary Circle of the Tyrants, which is an absolute fan favourite from Celtic Frost. A very well-renowned track indeed. A true masterpiece there. Then we've got Beyond the North Winds, another great one, as is one of my personal favourites from the album, Fainted Eyes. Then we've got a sort of weird, trippy interlude piece in the form of Tears in a Prophet's Dream, before the very grand closing, doomy drone masterpiece, Necromantical Screams. A very weird number indeed. But this album, a huge inspiration for what became the second wave of black metal, and of course just, extreme music in general. There's not a lot wrong with this album. It's a true classic, very thrashy, got a lot of speed, brilliant riffs though, Tom's vocals, cannot be faulted, perfectly fits the music, an absolute legend, an absolute masterpiece. Vying for top slot in this review. It was very difficult not to put that at first place, but To Make a Therion, for me, is only just pipped at the post by the debut release at number 1 for me, Morbid Tales. Now this album, I love this album. This is an absolute masterpiece in my opinion. Released in 1984, I believe. And I have it on CD and tape form, and I'd gladly have it on vinyl as well if I could. This album is packed with energy. It's got a real, although it's obviously a very influential album and instigator of black metal, and seen as a very, very integral part of the first wave of black metal, it's got a lot of venom in there. It's got a lot of Motorhead in that groove. You take a track like the title track, Morbid Tales, that's a heavy metal stomper. That's got a lot of energy. That's got a lot of sort of Nwabum influence there. Elsewhere, we've just got brilliant tracks throughout. First track proper, after the intro, the weird sort of screaming tortured souls intro of Human, we have Into the Crypts of Rays. Is there a Celtic Frost song that's been covered more times than that? I'd be surprised if there was, because that one seems to be covered by everyone. An absolute legendary track, a real thrasher, a real speedy track. Then we've got the stomping, dark brilliance of Visions of Mortality, and a real highlight for me. I absolutely love that track. That's got so much aggression there. Tom's vocals on this album are brilliant. He's got that real a snarl, and he's just got that very definable sound going on there. It's absolutely brilliant. The monolithic Dethroned Emperor, massively stomping, groovy stuff, absolutely freaking love it. Morbid Tales, as I mentioned, a bit of a heavy metal stomper there. Procreation of the Wicked, again, another real groover. The Great Return to the Eve, a magnificent track indeed. Start to finish, this is just brilliant. Nocturnal Fear, Circle of the Tyrants on this version. Could actually be a bit of a bonus track on that one. don't actually think, no, I was going to say it's not quite on the, the full album or the normal album. With the bonus edition there, we've got a few inclusions, but Nocturnal Fear, as I mentioned, what a spiky track that is. Full of energy, full of aggression there. Such a good speedy album. Killer riffs. I just love it. I love the energy and power of this album. It's got so much going on, such high quality material. And you think about the time, this is 1984, thrash was still in its infancy. The second wave of black metal was on the horizon there. First wave black metal in full swing. This is the kind of powerful stuff that we're getting. And it's just absolutely magnificent. Freaking love this album so much. Number 1, Morbid Tales. It contains probably my favourite Celtic Frost songs, to be honest, in the form of Visions of Mortality, Dethroned Emperor, Procreation and the Wicked, and Nocturnal Fear. Absolutely love them. Totally magnificent stuff. Cannot get enough. So there you have it. My very humble album rankings of the Celtic Frost catalogue. Now, as always, as a bit of a disclaimer, bit of a waiver there, please do bear in mind that this is entirely my own opinion, and you may agree, you may disagree. Feel free to share your album rankings of the Celtic Frost catalogue, but respect my opinion. I respect yours. We don't need to have a fight about it. After all, we're all here for the common cause of loving metal music. It's a way of life. So, just to recap then, number 5, we have Into the Pandemonium from 1987. Very experimental album that I just cannot quite connect with. Number 4, Vanity Nemesis from 1990. A thrasher, but still not quite as good as albums such as this. At number 3, Monotheist from 2006. A new incarnation of Celtic Frost that was sadly short-lived, but has lived on in the form of Triptychon. 1985. Number 2, To Megatherion. Their second album, an absolute bruiser. Thrashing, dark, bleak, full of aggression. Love it. And number 1, of course, the top spot going to the debut album, Morbid Tales. An absolutely glorious one. Some people would consider this to be an EP. However, I am going to say that it's an album for the purpose of this. Depends what source you're looking at, to be honest. In my opinion, this is an album. You may disagree. If we're going to rank just releases then yeah, this is still my favourite. Morbid Tales, 1984. As I say, feel free to share your album rankings. Do you disagree? Do you agree? What are your thoughts? Do you absolutely love Cold Lakes? Do you absolutely love Into the Pandemonium? Do you think that To Megatherion and Morbid Tales are pants? If you do, I'd be very, very surprised indeed. Feel free to share, my friends, and thank you very much for watching. Do feel free to like and subscribe as always. It's very much appreciated. Take care of yourselves, my friends, and until the next time, stay heavy.